Avec l'agent de voyage Tempo Afrique Travel, pas de problème de connexion, pas de problème de transfert de vol. Avec l'agent de voyage Tempo Afrique Travel, c'est le voyage en toute tranquillité, en toute beauté, de votre maison jusqu'à votre destination. Votre satisfaction est notre plaisir.
Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about who is allowed to work in the United States. Yeah, very interesting, right? So you're a foreign resident or a foreigner from another country coming to the United States. You're residing in the United States. You need to pay bills. And in order to pay bills, you need to work. And in order to work, you need to be allowed to work. You need to have that document that allows you to work. And what am I talking about? It's called the Employment Authorization Document. So that card, it's a card, it looks like a driver's license, and it contains your name, your last name, and your visa classification, as well as your date of birth, all your information. It has your picture ID, and also it will have an endorsement, which I'll be talking to you about later. So in order for you to work, your employer has to see that you're permitted to work in the United States. If you don't have that document, if you don't have that card, you may not be allowed to work. And if an employer hires you without you presenting that document, it is illegal, and that employer may be in trouble, and you as well might be in trouble. So with the employment authorization document, I'm going to tell you who can get that document and who is not eligible to receive that document or that card. So first off, if you're a United States citizen, if you're a lawful permanent resident, if you're also a conditional resident, you really don't need a work authorization because you will have your green card. If you have your green card, you don't need a work authorization. So an employer looking at your green card will know that you are permitted to work in the United States. So for the other group, how else can you present your work authorization? So for this group would be an applicant for asylum, a refugee, if you're applying for VAWA, the Violence Against Women's Act, U visa, also a fiancé. All these groups are allowed, and then if you're on TPS, all these are allowed to apply for work authorization. And work authorization is also called work permit. It's just permitting you to work. So with this document, it has a duration of how long you can work. It's not forever. It's usually, some are for 1 year and some are for 2 years. So it's always good to honor that date, and it's renewable. So as long as you are in status, it is renewable. So I would suggest, usually the processing time is between 60 and 90 days, but there's a lot of delay lately, and you are supposed to, maybe before 6 months, if it's 6 months to the expiry date, I would recommend you start renewing or applying for a renewal. So with the work authorization document, what that means is you're able to work, and if you're no longer in status, that will be terminated because it's a benefit, as it is incident to your status. So as long as you remain in that status. And I must also say that there are different categories. The ones I listed are just a few. There are about over 40 categories of the work authorization categories. So you should fit into one of them to be able to get one. So I will get to the list of those who cannot or not, who are not allowed to work. And in this category, you have the visitors. If you're here visiting, you're not allowed to work and you can get a work authorization. But if you change your status to some other status, then you may, by virtue of that status, be able to get a work authorization or be allowed to work. But a visitor's visa will not allow you to work. You're not permitted to work with a visitor's visa. The other group is those with who don't come who will not come into the country without who will come into the country without a visa, and that's those who participate in the visa waiver program. So if your country participates in that visa waiver program, these are countries that can enter the United States. You can enter in, if you belong to that country, you enter the United States without a visa. You're allowed to stay for 90 days, and at the end of the 90 days, you need to leave. So with this, if you come in with a visa, under the visa waiver program, you're not entitled to a work authorization. The other group is there's a transit visa. So assuming you're traveling to another country and you have to transit through the United States. It's called a C visa. You're still not allowed to work with a C visa. So these are really the distinctions, the various groups of who can apply for a work authorization, who cannot, who's not allowed to work, and then those who don't even need that. So those are the three categories. So now I'm going to ask you, why would I even apply for a work authorization, and will I be assured that it will be granted? Yes, the process is for any application, any immigration application, usually the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, that's the USCIS, issues this work authorization. But you have to apply for that. You have to apply for it. And in applying, I'm going to give you different instances on how you can apply. The application is the form I-765. With that, you have to submit that with supporting evidence, and USCIS will decide whether or not to grant that. So when applying, there is a filing fee, and the filing fee also will depend on your category. So for instance, if you are an asylee and you have applied for asylum and you want to apply for work authorization, usually after a certain period, when you apply, the first application for asylum applicants is usually free. But lately, you're now allowed to pay for just the biometrics. And then when it's time for the renewal, if you're granted the work authorization and it is time for renewal, you would have to pay $495. So 410 is the filing fee and $85 is the biometrics fee. So prior to this time, you could only pay for, you didn't even need to pay for work authorization if you're an asylum applicant, but now you have to pay at least the biometrics fee. So another group I'll talk to you about is maybe those adjusting through marriage. With that, if you are filing with your entire application, that's your adjustment of status application, you don't need to pay a separate fee for the work authorization because that's incident to status. As well, when it's time for renewal, you also don't pay for renewal. That's one of the categories that you don't pay separately for work authorization. So now there are other groups. So these are just examples of the groups. So for each group, you'd want to know, what is it? Are you supposed to pay or are you not supposed to pay? And that's really the distinction. Now, for some as well, when it's time for renewal, for some of them, for some groups, you can automatically extend your work authorization. There's an automatic extension for 180 days. So you would have to want to check when it's time for renewal to see if you are eligible for that automatic extension. It's usually 180 days. Okay. So when you have applied for your work authorization, you have submitted that, and of course, you're expecting that it will be approved. So if for some reason it is denied, then you're given a reason for why it is denied, and you'd want to respond or provide or furnish information about what is needed. Also, if you have been granted and you're lucky it's been approved, the next question will be maybe for some reason you didn't receive the work authorization. You've expected that card in the mail and you have not received it. And you'll be wondering what has gone wrong. Yes, things can go wrong. So first off, you want to make sure that your address is current. And USCIS has requested, and it is that anytime you move or change your address, you're supposed to notify United and the USCIS at least within 10 days or as soon as you move. That is very important because one of the reasons for why you're not receiving your work authorization could be because you moved and you did not inform USCIS. So maybe they would have sent it to the old address. So always make sure you're updating your address each time you move. So assuming you still get lucky, your work authorization is approved, but it got lost. What do you do? Yes, that happens. So when that happens, unfortunately, you have to apply again and you have to pay another filing fee. And this same scenario, this same result will occur if your work authorization is damaged or it is lost. You have to apply again and you have to pay for the filing fees again. But if it's a scenario where you receive your work authorization, it's approved, I'd always advise you to check and make sure that the information there is correct because it has your information, your name, make sure it's spelled right, your date of birth, your A number, your visa classification, and you want to make sure that all those things are there and they're correct. So if there's a mistake on that card when you receive it, you can have that mistake corrected without a fee if the mistake is not your fault. But if it is your fault, then you have to pay another fee for USCIS to correct that. But if the fault is from USCIS, then you don't need to pay a fee. But then you need to let them know or apply again, but without a fee. So what if you have waited for your work authorization and you have not received it? And it's been a while. Yes, it is time. You can contact USCIS. You can do an inquiry to USCIS either by calling them on their customer service number, or you can put an inquiry online to find out where your work authorization is. So you're allowed to do that. So that is, there's a very important endorsement I'm going to talk about when it comes to the work authorization. So as you see your card on the bottom, there's going to be an endorsement of not valid for reentry into the United States, or it could serve as 512 advance parole. So what does this endorsement mean? So it means that you cannot use that to travel outside the United States. So depending on, and I'm going to give you an example of an adjustment of status by marriage. If you're filing your application with adjustment of status with your work authorization and with your application for advance parole, yes, when it is granted, USCIS will not issue two cards. They will combine the two cards in one. So you're going to have your work authorization and you have your advance parole. So that it can serve as advance parole means you can use that to travel. However, when it comes to traveling, even though that is endorsed there, you'd want to be careful, especially if you are an adjustment of status applicant. I'll ask you to contact your lawyer for advice before you embark on a trip. Because if you filed your adjustment of status when you were out of status, that may affect you. You can always travel, but when it's coming back, the Border Patrol, those at the airport, Customs and Border Patrol, We'll have to look at whether you were out of status when you applied for your adjustment of status and all of that. So there, you may not be allowed to come in. So it's always good to seek that legal advice, and don't take it for granted that because the endorsement is there that you're free to travel. Yes, you can travel, but then there might be a problem when you're coming back. So always look out for that. Okay. Then with the reentry, it's already stated there that not valid for reentry. So it means you can't use that to re-enter the country. So you can't even leave at all. So always take note of those endorsements. And I'd also want to let you know that with the work authorization, when you're applying, you can apply for your social security number. So those two departments, the Social Security Administration works with USCIS. So if you check that, yes, you would need a social security number, then after your work authorization is approved and you receive that, you're also going to get your social security number. So if you have children, yes, every application is always separate. They are all independent. So if you have children, I know you're going to be wondering, my children don't work. Why do I need a work authorization for them? Yes, they will need that because they would need their social security number. And that's why you can use that and you can apply for your children's work authorization just for that social security number. So that's about all I have for work authorization. And I've gone through those who can apply for work authorization. I've discussed the groups, the different groups, that's the United States citizen, the lawful permanent residents, and those ones don't need work authorization. And those who can apply, those who are fiancé in the fiancé visa category, adjustment of status, asylum, refugee, VAWA, those can apply. And those who are not allowed to apply again are visitors and those under the visa waiver program. So that I've told you, and then also I have also discussed how you can apply and what happens after applying, you don't get approved, and if your work authorization is missing or it's destroyed, what you should do. So that brings me to the end of this segment, and I look forward to seeing you next week. I hope you found it helpful, and feel free to contact me if you have questions. Feel free to share the video with others who will find it helpful, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for tuning in. Bye.
C'est encore Yves Kenao, c'est toujours Yves Kenao qui revient. Cette fois-ci, pour vous dire que Tempo Afrique TV vous offre plus de 4000 chaînes de télévision. Les chaînes européennes, les chaînes américaines, les chaînes asiatiques, les chaînes africaines. À un prix imbattable. À un prix imbattable. Tenez-vous bien. $185 pour 12 mois, inclus le box. Alors, où est-ce que vous pouvez trouver mieux que ça si ce n'est pas sur Tempo Afrique TV? Mesdames, Messieurs, appelez seulement le 612 804 0295 et vous serez servi. Vous serez agréablement surpris de voir plus de 4000 chaînes de télévision rouler sur votre écran comme ça, et vous choisissez laquelle vous voulez. Alors mesdames, n'hésitez pas. N'hésitez surtout pas et ne vous faites pas compter. Prenez votre téléphone, prenez le tout de suite et appelez le 612, le 804, le 02 95. Nous sommes là, ici à Tempo TV, pour rendre votre vie simple et agréable. Alors, saisissez l'occasion. $185 pour toute une année, pour 12 mois, inclus le box. Quoi de mieux que ça?